What about you,
It's like the only series I've ever seen.
I've been reading Wheel of Time.
Been reading what now?
And when was the last time you read it?
The Wheel of
Fahrenheit
Time.
451.
Oh, I didn't know you were still reading that. How far have you gotten?
Not far. It's complex.
Not far, as in he started.
I read it a long time ago, and then I started over. So, because you know.
Well, building a habit of reading is like really important for a young person. So I know you guys have probably been pushed about this a little bit before. I guess Elijah more recently has been encouraged about that from Emmanuel, but that's something that I think is a really good investment, is to get into a habit of reading. Not just, at first it may seem like it's kind of something that you're doing to discipline yourself, and that's fine, but it'll eventually become something that you genuinely enjoy doing.
I enjoy reading when I find a book that I like. I just can't ever find books that I enjoy.
You have to, and this is where it is difficult, but you kind of have to discipline yourself into acquiring certain tastes. So always reading fun but sort of useless novels is not really a good way to build that practice and habit of reading, because eventually you should come to read some beneficial books, and not all beneficial books are purely nonfiction, which means it's not stories, because there are plenty of novels that are worth reading for sure. But I'm kind of a stickler for classics, so I really like reading classic books, which include authors that typically are fairly old, like kind of probably into the all the centuries preceding, like mid-19th century, 1900s. And a lot of those classics, actually, if not most of them, include novels. So you guys know I'm reading War and Peace by Tolstoy. You guys know that huge book I am? I'm almost done with that, and the story is enjoyable, but it's been a huge learning experience to see just the way that Tolstoy, as the author, views the world and how he actually views history specifically. And so there's certainly plenty to learn from stories and novels. But my point is talking specifically to actually all of you, because some of you read, but some of you don't really. I think it's a really good habit to find a good book and discipline yourself to regularly read.
So it's like, find a book and it's hard to get into it, but you have to get into it, and then once you start getting into it, you read it.
Well, it's all about time management too, because typically the first thing you do when your brain's like, what to do now, like a split second later, it's straight onto YouTube Shorts, basically, or Snapchat. I'm just saying, that's like just complete
Smash.
It's like, yeah, it's still brain wasting.
Yeah, but not YouTube Shorts.
I'm just saying,
I know.
you have to catch yourself. That's where the first step of discipline comes in. Obviously, reading is not the only thing that you can discipline your time with. It just is one that is both very beneficial and takes time, because you can't read, and maybe you can start reading only 10 minutes a day. That's fine, actually. That's a good way to start disciplining yourself, is to take it by small segments. Set apart at least 10 minutes a day to read. Do that for about a week, and then start adding a few minutes more. And you can get to a good 30 minutes a day, which isn't bad. Sylvester, you gonna do that?
What book am I gonna read?
Huh?
What book am I gonna read?
Figure it out. I have plenty of
A
suggestions.
little bit of everything.
Kayla probably has some good suggestions. She's about your age and she has similar interests, and she reads, so she can probably recommend some stuff.
I mainly read history stuff. If you don't like history, you probably should.
Esther, I don't even know if you tried to read much history novels, so you...
Probably not.
Well,
Is Anne of
So
Green
just
Gables
try it.
somewhat historical? Like, it goes back a little bit, but...
It doesn't provide, like, as far as I know, like a whole lot of historical context.
It does. There's a
It's a
war that
boring
went
book,
on.
honestly.
Huh?
There's a war that went on during that time, so...
Yeah, but it's all focused primarily on
Yeah, well,
Born to little
the family
boys.
and the people, which is what novels typically do.
Or a lot of just people.
Just you.
There's still learning experiences that comes from reading books that are about family dynamics in a young girl's life, those are still things that can be beneficial. Anne of Green Gables is considered a classic, so I think that would be a good thing.
She's already read it. I was just saying.
Another thing that maybe you'd like too is Jane Eyre by I think that was Emily Bronte.
What?
Didn't read it.
It's really a good book.
Wait, what's it called?
It's Jane Eyre. You'd probably like that. It's about the life of a young girl who had a
I didn't
pretty
finish
tough
War of the
childhood.
Worlds.
Oh, you never finished that?
I
thought you-
lost the book.
Yeah, obviously means you didn't.
I did. I was like in the middle of the book and it was getting pretty intense. They were getting to the.
I would be very impressed if you were able to successfully make it through Jane Eyre, because it is a fairly large book, but it is. At least I
I
consider
think we
it
have
to
Jane Eyre, right?
be a good page turner. I
Probably
listened to
sold
it
to
on
the
audio,
highest
but it was
bidder.
pretty good. I liked it.
It's like.
Anyways,
Little House on the Prairie is a new book.
yeah.
We read that.
Series.
We
That
read
was
that
pretty
as a
good.
family when we were all younger.
That's what we were doing right now. with my family.
Oh, nice.
We have separate reading that each of us kids, well, me and Kaden do 25 minutes a day. And then the little
Nice.
boys will read their tiny little paper books.
That's funny. But good. Developing a
The
good habit.
Lowe's.
So.
I know the Lowe's read a lot.
Well, Isaiah.
Well,
Isaiah can't get his head out of the books.
Yeah, Isaiah is a really good example for any of you. Just consistent reading, and it's more than a habit, but it's like a pleasure for him. He really enjoys doing it, and he does it adamantly. So
Well, he does read pretty pleasurable books, but.
he's reading Redwall, which is like has a bunch of old English in it.
Oh, really?
Fictional to the max.
Yeah, but it's similar to Lord of the Rings in
Which
some
are, like,
aspects.
As fictional as books get.
Yeah, but what's your point?
I thought you were talking about like recommending reading classics rather than.
Redwall's. I don't know what category of classics that would be in, but those are
It's
older
still
I
books.
think it makes a book of classics.
Huh? It usually has to do with, I guess, the collective opinion of maybe literary scholars or something, but just it's an acclaimed and influential book usually ends up as a classic, which is why, and typically it takes time for it to do so, which is why most classic books are older, at least 50,
You know, times
60
of
to
classic.
100 or over 100 years old.
Is Great Expectations a classic?
Yeah, for sure. Most of, if not all of Charles Darwin's, what's his name? Why am I,
Twist.
Yeah.
I forget what his name is.
Charles Dickens.
Dickens.
Dickens, yeah, Charles Dickens. I said Charles. Charles Darwin's book is Origin of Species, also about. But yeah, most of his Great Expectations, Tale of Two Cities, Oliver Twist, those are certainly classics. Yeah. Great. You probably like Great Expectations too. That's a really good one. It's a big book with a big and I wouldn't say super complex, but really solid storyline that is very enjoyable. So you'd
When
probably
read it,
I would
had,
recommend
like,
that
a
too.
small book that would break pretty much everything down instead of having.
Those are called
Details.
abridged versions. Well, I don't know exactly what you're talking about, but there are abridged versions of classics that forget what publisher abridged a lot of books, a lot of classic books for kids. But I read Moby Dick that way. It was a super short abridged version of a humongous novel, which is typically thought to be really tough to get through. But
Which one is it?
those are all the same book. They just are different publishers. So yeah, that's definitely, I would recommend Great Expectations. That's a good one. Charles Darwin, the way he writes, is actually you probably really enjoy listening to it too, because that's what I did. The way he writes it seems really wordy and very fanciful almost, but it's at the same time super enjoyable. And so if you enjoyed that style of writing, which is easier to follow along when it's in the mode of a story, then you might really improve your vocabulary as well, which is an important benefit of reading. It expands your mind in so many ways. It's just why it's really important and beneficial to, like I said, build a practice of reading.
I agree.
So what else then would you think would be a benefit of reading? this is to kind of inspire
So
you
that you can read better.
and give you a bit of a. It's both to inspire you and also give you a bit of a goal and motivation to
If you read
to
more,
read.
you can write better.
Okay. What else do you think is a benefit of reading?
Not only is
You
reading
can
like
talk better.
super good for you,
Okay.
like it I've heard
It
that people
broadens
who
your brain.
Yeah, it certainly does, but in what ways?
Vocabulary ways.
Yeah, that's what I just mentioned.
Yeah.
What else?
Imaginary.
Larry.
I don't know what book you read that word from, but that's not a word.
That wasn't funny.
Okay, what else?
You can say that you read books. People ask you if you've read books.
If that's your goal for reading, then I'm not sure you'll get much out of the book you read.
I read a book mostly because I want to enjoy a story. I mean, the educational parts of it are good. But I like, okay, you just interrupted me.
To find a spiritual meaning in the book you read, whether it is historical fiction,
Uh-huh.
fiction, or
Did you experience that with any book you read recently?
well,
As an example?
I usually don't read books that are not historical, but
Sure.
I don't know. I can't think of anyone that I can remember that
Yeah.
way, but I do remember reading stuff like that.
Yeah, I do think that's an important and really cool aspect of books too, because if you have this knowledge of the many, many things that you've read and the many, many books that you have read of events that have occurred and the way characters reacted to certain things and the way events played out in particular ways, then obviously that broadens your mind and your mind experience. Because some people say that books are like the most effective way to travel the world almost, because you can sit and read and have experience being in so many different places without having moved from your chair. So you have all these experiences that have played out in your mind through the words you've read on the pages of the books you've read. And you're therefore, so say like in a conversation, you guys know how important and effective, as we've talked about in poetry, things like metaphors and analogies are in explaining things, because you compare it to a simple event or a simple story. You compare a complex subject that's hard to understand through a simple story. You are far, far better at doing that when you've read stories, when you've read events that have been described for pages. That's another, I think, a huge benefit in books is it makes you far more skillful and adept in both being able to comprehend knowledge and express it. So that's another huge benefit of reading. Anyone else have any thoughts as it concerns reading in general or its benefits? No one? All right. So I think we're on page 18 here in the book. I don't know if we're all there or not. So before we look into I think it's 23 here. I'm asking you guys questions because I want your minds to be active before we mindlessly read a poem together without thinking about what we're doing and wishing we were somewhere else. What? Huh?
Keep saying things and like literally.
I literally just said 23. Answered your question.
All right, Naomi, then my question is directed specifically to you to answer first. What is significant about poetry in comparison to things like novels and nonfiction books?
It brings out more creativity and stuff when you
Okay.
read poems.
Because obviously when we read things, the author's intention was to convey a message or an idea, right? and poetry is the same thing, or it's the same, serves the same purpose, but it does so in a different way. So what distinguishes poetry as a method to convey an idea from something like a novel?
Like it's just a lot shorter than like obviously a novel or something. And it carries a lot of information in just that short little poem.
Yep.
And it's just the writer will put all their thoughts and put it in a way that might be harder to understand, like by using metaphors and stuff, by just putting it in a small little poem, and there's a lot of thoughts in that.
Yeah. So I think someone like Emily Dickinson serves as a good example of someone whose poetry leaves room for a lot of interpretation, right? Because she's not very precise, and she doesn't give a lot of detail and background and context to the words that she writes in a poem, right? It's usually kind of mysterious.
Kind of gives it more emotion to it.
Yeah, for sure.
And
That's
depth.
a really important aspect of poetry, is the emotive aspect of it. Even the musical aspect of it. Remember we talked a little bit about rhythm and meter that's usually involved in poetry in a similar way that you find in music or song. That is another thing that makes it differ from something like a novel or an essay. So, Elijah, what do you think? What's special about poetry?
It's personal.
Okay, what makes it personal then?
It usually comes out of experience of the person's life and comes out directly from their own views on things.
Okay, so how would that be different from an essay?
Essay.
Because that's more of a it's more towards another subject than from the person's mind.
I don't know
And
what
it's
you mean.
written differently.
Yeah, it's certainly written differently, but I want to know what distinguishes poetry in the way that it's written differently from something like an essay.
Oh, structure.
So say like you were assigned to write both an essay and a poem about the importance of family, and the subject is dear to you and you're passionate about it, so you express that through the way you write your essay, but you also do it through the way you write your poem. But it's in the same way.
No.
So what makes it
like
different?
more descriptive on, like, wait, what was the first reason?
Like I was saying, the importance of family as an example.
Be more in depth of the importance of family, going into like every detail, and but then a poem would be just like, I guess an essay would still be your thoughts on it, but like it just be obviously it's shorter, and it
Mhm.
holds a lot of thought still in the length of it, but a lot of times it has more depth and meaning,
Yeah.
where in an essay it's more of just like teaching the person reading it something,
Right.
I guess.
Yeah, like I think along with what you were saying, you're making good points. Like with an essay, you're trying to get the person reading it to follow along almost like a logical train of thought through introducing points in a specific order, and then in that way trying to convince them of the way you think about family and its importance. While something like a poem is not trying to convince the reader through logic as much as it is through feeling, in the same way that a song would. It just invokes an emotion instantly to those that are willing or able to feel that emotion. And it does, like you said, do it in a profound and effective way. So, both, what's that, sorry?
Is it kind of like Psalms in the Bible? How
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Poems and some of them are songs.
Yeah. In fact, most of the Old Testament, including the Psalms, even things like, I think, Exodus, which were authored by Moses, as far as we know, all of those were actually written in poetic form. If you didn't know that, you already knew that with the Psalms and stuff. But that's an important or an interesting point that my dad made about when he was going through some of the Old Testament. He said they were all written in almost as if they were poetry. Of course, that was in a different language, but anyways, why don't we take a look at 21 here?
21 is what?
23, I'm sorry. Page 18. Naomi, do you mind reading for us?
$21?
23.
Oh. 'Twas such a little boat that toddled down the bay. 'Twas such a gallant sea.
That's just gallant.
Oh, gallant sea that beckoned it away. 'Twas such a greedy wave that licked it from the coast, nor ever guessed the stately sails my little craft was lost.
Obviously, the first question in our minds is what the boat or the craft resembles, has some connection to Emily herself. But if you have any thoughts about what that could be, they don't have to be particularly confident thoughts, just some things that come to your mind. Don't hesitate to share.
Well, it kind of reminds me of when I was younger, we would make these little boats out of paper.
Yeah.
And we would put it along the little stream. And
Mhm.
it kind of reminds me of
Interesting.
that,
Yeah.
how at the end, how it talks about that, but then at the end it says, my little craft was lost. That's
Yeah.
kind of what it reminds me of.
Interesting.
Because they were made out of paper and it did not stay up that long.
So maybe in this case, the little craft could resemble something like her childhood, perhaps, as she went into adulthood. The purity and innocence of childhood left her. This is a sort of ode to that, but that's just a thought. Naomi and Elijah, what do you think?
Honestly, it just seems like she's talking about this small experience of some boat being taken off the seashore.
No, she just used
Because, like, it seems like if she was trying to indicate something else, she'd use different words.
What do you mean?
I don't know, I don't see the significant meaning within the poem.
it is very simple and doesn't have that many, like, it's just really hard to understand if she was trying to say anything else.
Yeah, that's really kind of always seemed the case with most of her poetry. It's not very easy to interpret because she doesn't. There is no context provided, at least in this book. Kind of interesting because 24 actually seems to be a potential continuation of 23. So Esther, why don't you read that? 24.
Whether my bark went down at sea, whether she met with, is that gales?
Yeah.
Gales, whether to isles enchanted she bent her docile sails. By what mystic mooring she has held today, this is the errand of the eye out upon the bay.
So this poem is obviously directed, or she's trying to express the sense of this question she has within her heart about where whatever this small boat resembles, where that went, what its ultimate fate was, and that she ends the poem basically saying that this continues to be the searching question in her heart is continually what happened to the small ship. So even more, we continue to wonder what this small ship resembles. So it maybe resembles a person or a part of herself.
I really do think it actually is kind of talking about her, younger life, because the first one started talking about little.
Yeah.
So, and the craft, when you are little, you do like craft little boats like that. And it ends by saying that the little craft was lost.
Right. Yeah, that's why I initially thought that, but again, you can never be really that sure
Yeah.
because her poems. There's nothing about her poetry that. There's no evidence that gives us confidence in that idea, and there's also no evidence that serves as evidence or as like a counter evidence to what we think. So that's why it's really open and kind of difficult to approach with certainty.
Do you have your book?
No, he doesn't.
Well, I can read it.
Then why don't you read 25? And before you do, it mentions Belshazzar, and as you see in the note down here, that is referring to the last king of Babylonia in the Bible. He was the one that was warned of his death by the mysterious writing that appeared on the wall of his palace. That was when, in Daniel, when God wrote, I forget what that word is, but Dad knows. He used to say it sometimes.
Belshazzar had a letter he never had but one. Belshazzar's correspondent concluded and begun in that immortal copy. The conscience, what is conscience?
Conscience, yeah.
Yes, conscience of us all can read without its glasses on Revelation's wall.
So what do you think she's doing here and using the example of Belshazzar and the writing on the wall? It doesn't tell us exactly what was written, and I can't quite remember myself. But we do know through the note that I just read that it was, at least to the understanding of the editor here, it was a warning of Belshazzar's death, which is what the writing on the wall was. And she's generalizing that to have a certain weight on our own consciences. So what do you think she's trying to say here? It might seem like a complex thought, but you can try to simplify things. So who is Belshazzar's correspondent in the third line there? Who's that?
I have no idea.
Well, who wrote the letters on the wall?
What's a correspondent again?
Someone that you're dealing with or communicating with in a certain scenario.
God.
Yeah. It's like if you're writing a letter to Isaac, then Isaac would be your correspondent. So in this case, Belshazzar's correspondent is talking about God. So Belshazzar had a letter he never had but one. So the message he received was the only message that is that which was written on the wall by God. Belshazzar's correspondent concluded and begun in that immortal copy, so that which was written on the wall, the conscience of us all can read without its glasses Revelation's wall. Naomi, what do you think?
I'm kind of lost.
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
I don't really know much about Belshazzar either, or that.
I don't think that's of too much importance as long as you know what occurred in this event alluded to in the
Probably have
Bible.
to know what the word was.
Let's look up what was written on the wall. What was it? All right, there was yeah, we'll just. Oh yeah. It was Mene Tekel Upharsin, which means God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. And basically, you have been weighed and found wanting. So try to interpret that message as something that, as Emily Dickinson is referring to here, something that is written, also warning that is written upon the conscience of every human being. I think that may be what she's saying there. The conscience of us all. So I guess there's not too much more to expound on that, although I think there could be. So why don't we move on to 26. Kayla, do you want to read that for us?
The brain within its runs.
That would be groove.
Groove. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Within its groove runs evenly and true. But let a splinter swerve, 'twere easier for you to put the water back when floods have slit the hills and scooped a turnpike for themselves and bottled it out the mills.
Someone want to look up the definition of turnpike? I don't know how you pronounce it. I actually don't know myself.
Hello, students.
Good note.
Goodbye.
Yeah.
I think Mom will be here in like 20 minutes.
Mom?
She's coming here?
She's apparently meeting with Justin about the setup tomorrow or something.
Oh, yeah. Okay. See you guys.
Bye, Dad. Bye.
Bye.
Ta-ta.
So did you find the definition there?
Almost. Okay, well, wait, what are you typing? I have fake nails on, so I apologize because they do not like to listen. So somebody else with
Oh.
fingers that are available.
An expressway, especially one on which a toll is charged.
Sorry, what? Turnpike?
Turnpike. Turnpike. A spiked barrier fixed in or across a road or passage as a defense against sudden attack.
So I think this poem has something to do with the human mind or psyche in some way. It refers to the brain within its groove, runs evenly and true, but let a splinter swerve. Basically he's saying if let a splinter swerve, whatever that refers to. This is interesting. I don't know what she's saying.
Wait, what does she mean by mills? Like, what are mills?
Mills are yeah, I'm gonna do something contrary to our regular practice. I actually want to see an analysis of this poem.
Because they're saying she scooped up a turnpike for themselves and blotted out the mills. Because the turnpike is something that, like, stops sudden attack.
Let's see. So this is going to be an analysis from someone else. This is from Poematopia. I really want to know. I'm just trying to see here. Emily Dickinson's The Brain Within Its Groove is one of her poems on the brain, obviously. However, in this poem, the word brain, I think like I was saying, means mind, or more accurately, a train of thoughts. This piece, as per Dickinson's writing style, does not have a title, which is not what we're looking for.
None of them have a title.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Let's see. The text has two versions with slight differences in punctuation and words. Let's see. That doesn't matter. And that's all they give us. Oh, wait, here. Never mind.
Getting down.
The brain within its groove at first glance seems to say that the brain is initially focused on a single train of thoughts. It runs evenly and true when it is focused on its desired path. However, a tiny splinter can derail the brain from its course and open the floodgates of various thoughts, including the painful and raging ones. Dickinson uses the word splinter as a metaphor for a change or an impulse that can influence one's mind. If a person fails to control the raging current induced by the impulse, it can scoop the turnpike, another form of mental defense. I want to look up that wording.
It's like
A spiked barrier fixed in or across a road or passage as a defense against a sudden attack. Yeah. So it's like the things that people would set up in front of some settlements, like those sharp wooden things that they just point in the opposing direction of where they expected the force to come in. You guys know what that's rows of logs that were sharpened at the end, put in front of the village. Scoop the turnpike, another form of mental defense, and trot out the symbolic mills where thoughts are processed. It is a short poem with multiple layers of meanings as Dickinson plays with the expectations of her readers. Her use of the word brain means a train of thoughts, or simply the human mind. She recourses to the biological image of the groove brain because it is often used interchangeably with the mind. The moment it encounters a splinter, there can be a cataclysmic shift in its activities. The train of thoughts is derailed, and it can no longer go back to focusing on a single predetermined destination or path. That makes it a lot more interesting. So you guys understand then?
Yeah, I guess.
This poem is talking about the brain within its groove, so it's in a continuous and maybe even tranquil flow of thought over something. Obviously it's not specified here. But then there is this experience of there being a cataclysmic thought that then kind of opens the floodgates for no longer a continuous train of organized thought, but like that. This splinter can refer to something emotional, or whether that brings about a sense of anger or sadness or even joy, perhaps. It seems to have more of a negative connotation here, but it's once again relaying an internal and mental experience, which a lot of her poetry tends to describe. So I like that poem. So I think this next one is actually a really popular poem of hers, 27. Elijah can read that for us.
It's weird. Someone else gonna have to read it. It was doing each poem fine, and then it just didn't do that one. Someone else will have to read that.
Okay, I'll read it. I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell. They'd banish us, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog. To tell your name the livelong day to an admiring bog. That's kind of funny. What do you think she's trying to say here? She doesn't seem to be as what's the word? Well, she doesn't seem to be as like
Does it seem like kind of seems like she's talking
ambiguous
like
with her meaning.
friendship or something?
Friendship? Why do you think that? Because she mentions
What's
a
a
pair of
bog?
us.
What's a bog?
Place where a frog is like it's like a swampy place.
Yeah.
Why would they banish them?
Because maybe she's saying to live as one who recognizes that rather than being a somebody, they're really a nobody, then you're excluded from society for carrying that attitude. Well, instead, society accepts people who likes to think of themselves as someone who acts and presents themselves as someone who thinks they are someone. Like she compares that to a frog who ribbits and croaks obviously all day to the admiring bog. And obviously, is a frog and a bog positive picture?
Yes.
No, obviously not. A bog and a frog are demeaning terms that she's using there, obviously. And so what is she trying to say here then? I want you guys to offer some thoughts.
Mention something.
Huh?
But I guess it's not really.
Well, you were starting to, but you didn't really expound what you were thinking.
Good.
Huh?
I'm just saying, maybe it just wasn't the right definition. I just said maybe it kind of.
There's really
Kinda
not too
sounds
much
like a
right and
relation-
wrong here. We're just figuring things out together.
To me, it kind of sounds like a relationship, but. I don't
Okay.
really know.
What is the significance about that first part in which she's actually conversing with us as the readers? What's important about that?
She's making us know that we're nobody.
Well, she assumes in the poem that you answer yes, I am nobody. She's not telling us you are nobody. So there's obviously some kind of important meaning there. But what is it?
Kind of seems like a way of conversing with someone. Like. Wow.
All right.
Like. I don't know.
Just because there's a
I
conversation.
just have a question. Why is your neck so red?
Why is what? What?
Really, Naomi?
Weird.
What do you mean, why is my neck so
I'm
red?
just wondering. It's like a really red right here.
I don't know.
Burned it.
Anyways.
Okay.
Had to have the little Naomi comment.
Then there's
I
Caroline.
had to switch the conversation because I was.
Why don't just make us more excited? We read the analysis for this one too.
You're excited, am I?
So let's see. This is on litcharts.com.
Lit charts.
You literally just said what I said. Louder.
In the poem, a speaker introduces themselves, perhaps to the reader, as nobody, before excitedly realizing that the addressee is nobody too. So the person that this person is talking to is also nobody. Paradoxically, this hints at a community of nobodies. So she does kind of form a little community there in that interaction, in that dialogue. Paradoxically, this hints at a community of nobodies out there. These people just don't make as much noise as the somebodies. See, that was the kind of contrast I'd offer as well. Who crave attention and admiration. The poem then calls out to its readers to say that being humble, withdrawn, shy, or private is just fine, which we know Emily Dickinson definitely was. In fact, such a way of life has many virtues of its own. The poem is one of a number of Dickinson poems that questions the value of public admiration, something which eluded Dickinson in her own lifetime. Let's see. What is so funny? The speaker then talks about how boring it would be to be a somebody. It would leave nothing private. The speaker likens being a somebody to being a frog, like we had looked at there. Somebodies spend their time talking themselves up to anyone who will give them attention and admire them, comparable to frogs making their noises in a swamp. So then they go into more detail there, but I think that's kind of what we were thinking, right? It's a fairly simplistic view of
Honestly,
seeing
I'm
it.
lost about the whole
I
frog
am
thing.
too.
What do you mean you're lost about the
Lost
frog thing?
listening.
I'm lost about the whole entire poem.
No, the frog thing doesn't make sense.
It makes
Frog.
Then explain it to me.
plenty of sense.
Explain
Then
it.
tell us, Esther.
It's explaining that if there's the frogs are loud and looking. Okay, never mind.
No, Esther, you're on the right track. Naomi's just
I'm
being
just
a bad
not
influence.
even gonna look at her. The
Please
frogs
tell us.
are loud and looking for admiration.
Yeah.
To be seen, while the nobodies are nobodies.
The nobodies. Yeah, there are nobodies. It's plural. There are. You got
Yeah,
that
that's
right.
what they are. And so she's just saying how dreary it would be to be someone that is, I guess they're putting the frogs in a position where it's somebody. The frogs are somebody.
Mm.
And
you're nobody.
yeah. So
Must be
Yeah.
Mr. Pond.
So Naomi, are you a nobody or are you a frog?
she's a nobody.
Really? Is it the frog? No, she's the bog.
Anybody's a frog.
No, you're the bog. I said the other night how you smell.
Looks like one too.
All
What
right.
is a
guys.
bog?
Something that
It's a
stinks.
place for frogs, bro. It's like a swamp.
And
it's
we
like
all
a
know
pond.
you stink, Naomi. And you know it too.
Those are really,
Remember the
really
other night?
simple vocabulary, guys. Bog, like that's something you learn in preschool.
Like, remember if
I
you
didn't go to
to
preschool. I'm sorry.
You know, like where all the dead people are floating in the water.
Exactly. It was one of those.
Smells like a nasty ball.
All right,
Words
we're
of
gonna wrap
shame,
it up
games
there
of
for
yourself.
today.